So today we want to look at how we use information technology generally. And it is quite often that we overlook or ignore the fact that we have technology using. One of the problems that I find many students get into is that they are always using the technology, but they're not sure if the technology is helping them because they're just working with what they were given. But the fact is, technology has been used in every sphere of life, and we're going to look at how it relates to us, even in this time. Now, if we think about technology on a whole and where it's coming from, it might be kind of abstract to you. So let's look at a short history lesson per se. If we look at music and what music means to us, many times we don't think about what it means to us because we can get it freely. We can download it anywhere. We can download it from YouTube if we have a YouTube downloader. We could possibly log on to a live concert and listen to our favorite music. But years gone by, this was not the case. In the very early times or beginnings of music, we see where more or less musicians had to play for kings and queens, and this was just in their palace, and not many people got music information. Then, of course, there came the time when Greeks and Romans decided to take some of that music that they got in Egypt, you'd say, and conglomerate it with other forms of music from South Africa, from Europe, from Asia, and use that music in a form that brought joy to people. But then, that wasn't enough, so to speak, because if they wanted to share it with an entire crowd, they had to get more instruments, more sections. And so you'll find now that there was this birthing of this orchestra. And these orchestras would play in theaters and people would come and gather and see who was playing here, what was playing. But you had to travel miles upon miles upon miles just to see this in action. Now we have a greater luxury. We can be at our homes and watching a concert. We can be lying on our beds and, taking in something from Elephant Man in Germany, So all this thing has come about because of the use of technology. Now, if we come even closer to us, if you think about COVID-19, can you imagine the effects that would happen, or what would happen if we had no knowledge of COVID-19? Can you imagine if the government didn't have the information? And the fact is, because we have all kinds of technology, we can definitely get the information. But if we didn't have the technology, we would see where a lot of information would miss us. All right, we would have to get information by a snail mail, or somebody had to write something, and possibly 6 months from now would be getting information about the COVID-19 virus. And so what information technology has somehow revamped our way of living. And now that we are inside our homes, or staying home, or trying to keep safe, we are connecting via information technology tools. All right. But let's say, for instance, you wanted to become a blogger or a YouTube vlogger, and God forbid, a superstar on TikTok. But anyway, you get the gist. You would have to create your own content. And so if you're going to create your own content, part of that means capturing the content. And if you capture the content, it means you need a certain kind of device. Most often than that, is going to be a phone. When you capture this information, of course you'd want to store it. You want to manipulate it or edit it, and then you want to share it with the world. Years gone by, this was not the case. If you wanted to create a video, you had to do like what TV stations now do. Hire a camera crew, hire lighting people, hire sound people, and create all that atmosphere for the capturing of the video. And so, but now you have a phone. Now you have a smart camera, and you can immediately shoot any video you want, wherever you want, however you want. And what that does say is that computers generally have impacted every sphere of our lives. Every sphere in medicine, architecture, engineering, every single sphere of our lives has been touched by computers. And if you think about it, as we look around us, we'll see the technology around us. Our cars are becoming equipped with computers. More and more we have self-driving cars. A friend of mine, well, not a friend, but a past student came to me some years ago, and he was stationed in England, and he said that, sir, all we use are computers. We model everything on computers. I am hardly in the field. I'm sitting behind a desk, and all I'm doing is putting in schematics, doing drawings, making sure that everything works in accordance with the model that I'm given. And so what we are seeing now is the revolutionization of all we know and what all I know. You might, of course, have been brought up with a lot of technology around you, but the fact of the matter is, technology has now completely changed what we do. Of course, I'm now on TVJ and I'm using a PowerPoint presentation. So as an educator, I'm using technology. There was one particular scenario or one particular advertisement I was going through some time ago on YouTube. And while I was on it, there came a documentary popping up about doctors using technology in their research. And it was one particular situation in which they were trying to test truck drivers to find out how healthy they were. And it was these truck drivers driving from New York to possibly Florida. And what they did was to feed that truck driver a capsule that had sensors in it and basically examined the driver's intestinal tract and all of that. And they found that when they fed the truck drivers vegetable and healthy foods, they made many more stops along the way and had to, relieve themselves, as opposed to those who just ate French fries and burgers, etc. And they found that those who were having vegetable and all of that were much healthier. And so that came from using computers or using those small capsules with computers in them or computer sensors to sense what was going on in the digestive tract. So in every sphere of life, we find the use of computers. And this part of the syllabus generally talks about how these computers are applied to our everyday life. Architects are modeling things on their computers as opposed to having to go to the site. There are many architects might be using Google Maps to actually just scout a site to see what it looks like from an aerial view. There are other persons who would use drones just to scout sites, just to see what it looks like from an aerial shot. Also, I was watching another documentary, I think, or expose when they were shooting Django. Not Django, sorry. I think it was Django, one of them. But anyway, they were showing the aerial view of the set just to give a feel of what the shot should look like. And so we're using computers in every regard. With that said, it means that we are going to see an increase in the types of jobs relating to IT. We are going to need persons to program. We are going to need persons to program the computers. We're going to need persons who are network administrators. We're going to need social media specialists. We're going to need systems analysts. And what these persons are basically going to be professionals who are in need. So what we want to pay attention to here is that each of these jobs, though computer related, are going to be in some level of demand. Right now, most of us are on lockdown, and many persons are becoming vloggers. Many persons are creating websites and are becoming web developers. And so these jobs might even see a rise, because we are going to want to be on the net. We are going to want to have a presence on the World Wide Web. But let's say now you have created your content and you are now ready to upload it. Remember, we are going to have to make the distinction right here between internet and World Wide Web. Now, the internet, and according to your textbook, stands for interconnected network, which means that every single piece of device or every single phone, computer that is connected to the internet or has a router or connected to an ISP has become a part of the internet or an extension of the internet. But the services that we utilize, such as YouTube, social media services, Facebook, whatever it is, those are, or those constitute what we know to be the World Wide Web. So World Wide Web has to do with services. Internet has to do with the actual network. And if you are connected via your phone or via your computer, you are connected to the internet, but you are using services that reside on the internet. And of course, there are many other services. But let us just talk about the connection, so to speak. So you have your video, you're ready to upload. How does that take place? What happens? Well, first and foremost, maybe you're at home or wherever, and you're connected to a router. Now, the router is programmed to look for your ISP, which in this case might be Flora Digital. It doesn't matter. Your router is programmed to look for your ISP. And when you click, okay, you want YouTube, your router takes that request, or takes any request and sends it to your ISP. Your ISP now says, okay, you want YouTube, okay, let's see where YouTube is. And one of the things that comes straight to the fore is that if you type YouTube or whatever website, that particular website is mapped to what is called an IP address or Internet Protocol address. That Internet Protocol address has the alias YouTube. And whenever you try to look for that youtube.com, it looks for the IP address relating to YouTube and sends it to your ISP. And then what happens now? Your ISP searches for YouTube. After searching for YouTube, when it searches for YouTube, it finds the page and delivers it back to your ISP, back to your router, and then to you, and you get an index page. Now you might be asking, what does ISP mean? ISP stands simply for Internet Service Provider. Simple, all right? So your ISP delivers these things to you because you are given an IP address for YouTube or wherever, all right? Now, how do you connect to your router? In these day and ages, it's mostly Wi-Fi, and we get that. But your Wi-Fi is not the only way you can connect to your router. You can connect via an Ethernet port or an Ethernet cable. And this Ethernet cable is a part of what we call a twisted pair family. That twisted pair is basically wires that are connected to some ends, and you plug them into your computer as well as your router. And that connection facilitates you connecting to the internet generally. So when you do that now, or connect via Ethernet, what happens here is that between your router and your ISP, or your internet service provider, between you and your ISP is a set of coaxial cables and fiber optic cables. These coaxial cables will connect your router directly to some exchange on the road, or some contraption on your road, or on your telephone pole or wherever. And then that might be fed into another exchange or wherever it goes. And you have fibers running all along the road or wherever Flow decides to put them. And those fiber optic cables and those coaxial cables are much faster, or conduct electricity much faster than your twisted pair. Now, for those of you who do physics, and we jump into a little bit of physics here, your coaxial cable moves faster or delivers content faster because the bond that occurs between the elements or the compound, the metal. So there's a sea of electrons that causes the bond in the metal. And when an electric current runs through that metal, those electrons take the current and run with them. Where the fiber optic is concerned, these are just glass tubes that are appear in bundles. And these bundles basically have light pulses running through them. And you might be asking, how does that work? But if you're a physicist and you know the answer, good, I'm not going to tell you the answer until the end. So the fiber optic cable with the glass, as the light goes through it, it arrives at its destination. And of course, fiber is not the only thing. You might have microwaves, satellite, etc., being connected to your different ISPs or your different servers. Good? But again, if you know what the technology is behind the whole fiber optic capability, please jump onto Twitter and tweet. Remember, use the hashtag TVJSchoolsNotOut and give us the answer. So here you are now with your video, and you're ready to upload it. You're ready to move to YouTube. Right? What comes after that when you're going to YouTube? Well, let's look at it quickly. Here we have now a simple, what I call a trace route command. And this trace route command just shows me exactly what happens or what my computer has to go through to send a packet or send information to a YouTube server. In this YouTube server, or in my computer, I have the IP address along with the alias of the particular server that I'm looking for. In this case, I'm looking for YouTube. And right at the top of the screen, we have what is called an IP address, which is a 4-3-digit number. So in this case, it's 172.217.0.174. Now, this IP address is what my computer uses to send to the ISP to say, listen, I'm looking for this IP address. Please find it for me. And what happens here is that after 2 milliseconds, my computer gets a response from my router. So my router now has this IP address, 192.168.0.1. So after 2 milliseconds, all right, for those of you who do math, that is 0.002, yes? After 2 milliseconds, the router says, okay, I'm here. Then something happened and the request timed out, but the router sends out the request again. And this time it sends out a request to the ISP or to Flow Jamaica. And Flow Jamaica's IP address is 669.79.207.130. That is the IP address of my ISP. So as the packet goes along, as I trace the route between my computer and YouTube, it goes through several different computers and checking IP address and checking different routes to YouTube. And at the end of it all, after about 35 seconds or 46 seconds in total, the packet finally arrives at the YouTube server. So I get a response that, hey, that place exists on the web. I could even do what is called a ping command also to check if something is on the web. But again, remember, whenever you have a URL, whatever the URL is, it is mapped to an IP address. So let me just do something on the board quickly. There's a very common question, I think, or one question came on the exam some time ago. And, okay, the marker is almost gone. And they just split up addresses or split up the IP address and associated it with any kind of address. So this could be address number, ADD number, ADD street, city, parish. And they were asking what would be the entire IP address for a particular city or street given this kind of a setup. So let's say, for instance, this was the actual place or name of the place. And I'm not saying that this is TVJ's one either. All right? They would then ask, what is the total address for TVJ? And what they were looking for is the entire IP address in that fashion. And it's just another way of teaching you what IP addresses are about and how to use them. So as long as you're looking for, let's say you decide to go on Facebook now, somewhere on your machine you might have an IP address all right, somewhere on your computer. I can't go through how you find it now, but somewhere on your computer, it stores the IP address and maps the IP address to a URL so that you can always, or it searches that file first to see if they know where it is. If they don't know, then your IP address, or the URL, sorry, is sent directly to your ISP, and your ISP resolves it as is needed. There is one other IP address that I just want to show you. And it is this 127.0.0.1. That particular IP address references the computer itself. So if you search for 127.0.0.1 in your browser or wherever, what will happen is that it will search your computer to see if your computer is an actual server and has any pages or web pages associated with itself. All right, so that is how important an IP address is. So now you're creative with it again, and you're trying to upload it to YouTube. So here you are now with the server, and you're at the page. But there are other things that we need to pay attention to as it relates to the security of that upload. You're uploading your content. And as you upload your content has to go through a series of security stations. The first station that it tends to go through is a firewall, or host, we call it host-based firewall. And that host-based firewall is a piece of software inside an antivirus. And that firewall either prevents traffic from going out or prevents traffic from coming in. How that is done is that the firewall has a list of accessible points, or we call it an access table, and that table basically puts out what IP addresses are allowed to give your traffic, and what is blocked. And so that is in your software, in your antivirus software. And of course you can install it from wherever you have, but you most often have to pay for it. Then after you have that data going through your firewall and reaches your router might meet up another what is called a network-based firewall. Now, a network-based firewall has to be the bridge, so to speak, or the gate through which your information goes to the internet or comes from your internet. And this network-based firewall is always going to be something harder, as in an actual device. You can buy it, of course, and when you buy it, you tend to have to pay for a subscription with the particular organization that you bought it from. But your firewalls, your hard devices like this Firebox and Cisco, what they do the very same thing like your other firewall, your software firewall, but it's more robust in that the internet has to go straight into it before it comes to the router. And so that's another level of security that all ISPs use. And so here, if you're putting in your content and you want to buy a firewall, that would make sense. And if you want to create any kind of access list in the firewall, you can do that as well. So when you send your information out and it passes your own hard firewall, it comes to a firewall that your ISP is in charge of. And that ISP is going to possibly have one particular server or computer that is dedicated to watching what the firewall is doing. Same thing for YouTube. So anything that passes the firewall has been allowed access. And you want to ensure that whenever you create your own access list, then you create the list based on the sites you decide to visit or the sites that you don't want to visit. And of course, you would have to program that yourself. So firewalls help with traffic on the net. The antivirus, on the other hand, is completely different in that your antivirus just scans files on your computers. So let's say, for example, you finish your YouTube video and you run your antivirus scanner. All it does is scan the video or scan whatever else you have on your machine. And that is it. But as soon as you want to send traffic out on the internet, it has to meet upon the firewalls. And the firewalls decide what to let in, what to let out. All right? But that's not the only thing that we need to be cognizant of when we're protecting our computers. Many other things that we try to pay attention to when we're protecting computers is that we have all kind of different harm that can take preeminence. We have harm to hardware. And it might sound funny, but sometimes people become disgruntled at organizations, or even you become disgruntled and you might want to throw away your phone. That's an act of vandalism, and that is a threat as well to computer security. You can also think about devices being stolen, disasters, whether they are natural or man-made, can harm your computers. And then there's harm to data. There's a lot of data theft going on. There are a lot of persons who are creating or pretending to create things when they're just basically stealing it. And some of you might know that as plagiarism, right? And then there is theft of software, cracking of software. Now, I know that some of you are saying it's too expensive to buy the original, etc., etc. But for now, you can use some open source software, but understand that you should not be cracking software, or you should not be trying to hack into any organizations to get their software. And then you have misconduct online. A classical one now is cyberbullying. Everybody is saying that they are being bullied, and who's bullying who, and tweets going out about somebody's persona, etc. And some of these things might even border on propaganda. So we have to be careful on what we post or what is posted about us. And then even bigger, we have cyber terrorism. But these are facts coming to the fore now that we are using computers in such a remarkable way. So we have to protect our computers. And what are we protecting them from? Well, we are protecting them from the kinds of risks that might come up. And a risk basically is the potential outcome of an event happening, or an event of a threat that succeeds. So a threat can be somebody carrying a high power magnet to put on your laptop. All right. A threat can be somebody walking in with a hammer to break up your machines. A threat can be any one of these things. All right. And then, of course, we want to ensure that we deal with the risks. So that was risk. So the threat is the actual software or person that forms some kind of threat to the hardware, and the risk is the potential outcome. So that's what I meant. And then vulnerability is a weakness in a computer resource, whether it be weakness in software, whether it be weakness in hardware. And one particular case, which is a pretty old case, but very old hard drives had problems with the read-write heads, because as soon as a magnetic field came close to it, then it was gone, and we'll see why. But one vulnerability would be your hard disk having the capability of being magnetized, and then the risk would be losing the data, of course, losing your software, losing your operating system, and then the threat, of course, a very powerful magnet. Now, why was that a threat? In this particular diagram, we'll see where the read-write head has a certain clearance of about 5 nanometers from the surface of the disk. Now, a nanometer is actually 1 billionth. So the distance between your read-write head and the surface of the disk is 5 nanometers, meaning 5 billionth or 1 billionth, or 5 divided by 1 billion of a meter. And so that is very small. So if you put a magnet anywhere close, or a strong magnet anywhere close to this kind of a hard drive, then what happens is that the read-write head just drops directly onto the hard disk, onto the hard disk surface. And remember, the hard disk is always spinning. So as it spins and the read-write head touches it, it will just scratch the disk. And unfortunately, many persons don't understand that the read-write head is actually swiveling across the face of the disk. And so if it falls on the disk, it will scratch it all the way across as the disk spins. And so that is what you call a classic hard drive crash. And it was done on some computers years ago. Right now, I think most computers are coming equipped with what is called, well, solid state disks. And so those are much more robust and can withstand a certain level of magnetism. With that said, however, you don't want to bring them close to any magnets. All right? But what happens in the case of course, you do lose information? Well, you always try to have what is called a backup plan. All right? You always have to make sure that you have recovery plans in place. One thing that, well, when I was an intern at IBM years ago, one of my roles was supposed to ensure that I logged tapes from a backup that took place the night before. And so you'll find that these corporations will have logs of tapes and have logs of in a library. And what they'll do is that every night that they run a backup, the tapes are logged and placed in a library in a safe environment. And then at the end of the month, there's another backup. And that backup now is taken off-site to a place where there are security guards watching over it and all of that. So that kind of a planning makes sense. You have a backup schedule and you stick to it. I think it was just yesterday, one of my students said, "Sir, you know, something happened and my hard drive crashed." And I asked him, "Did you back up the files?" And he said, "Sir, well, we never back it up." And I'm saying, but you know that you need to do that, because what happens is that when you don't do those things, you end up losing out. So you have to have a backup schedule. Next, you have to have a recovery plan. What if you do lose the information? Then if you do lose the information and you had them backed up, you can always get them back. And backing up means that you can use online sites who will give you free space. You can use an external hard drive. You can use DVDs. And many operating systems have that kind of feature that you can back up your information. So you have to have a recovery plan. If I lose this, I can always go to Google or go to wherever, download my files because I had backed up until last week. You also might think that, hey, nothing's going to happen to my computer or my phone. That might not be true. So maybe you want to stash away or save some cash just in case you lose your phone or you lose your laptop, and you want to just have some money in place so you can buy something else that can function in the interim. You also want to have some kind of physical security. What that means is that you want to pay attention to locking your device, whether by using biometric mechanisms, iris scans, fingerprints, whatever the case is, and you use those kind of things. Some laptops even come with locks, actual lock and keys, and you can use that as well. And then of course you want to pay attention to protecting using software, which of course goes back to the use of antivirus, goes back to the use of firewalls if it's as host-based firewall, all right, and then goes back to the use of passwords and usernames. One of the problems with passwords and usernames is that people tend to use things that are familiar to them, and that might become familiar to other people as well. But what you want to do where that is concerned is when you create your username or password, you should write it down physically on something that you can keep stashed away. Don't store it on any computer, write it down physically, and of course use it. But make sure that even if you're using it, whatever it is, it should be gibberish. So if you want to write a password, a classic password that, let's say mine, I'm going to use my last name as a password. That would be easy. Yeah? Lewis. That would be easy to remember, yes? But it makes no sense to use something that is familiar. You want to look at what you have. So possibly I'd use L3WIS. But then most passwords need special characters. So it makes sense for me to add special characters to my password. But yes, this looks good or might look good, but this is also not recommended. What you want to do is to have a password that no one can figure out. So my password could be this. Complete gibberish. It means nothing to no one other than me who know it. All right? And so when you create your passwords, that's how you want to pay attention to you creating a password. So we've looked at routers, we've looked at websites, we've looked at antivirus programs and all this. So let's just jump into some questions really quickly so that you can actually get an idea as to what CXC might look like. So these questions come directly from your syllabus, and I'm going to try to explain some of it as we go along. And of course, if you're on Twitter or Instagram, you can tweet in your answers and let's hear from you. All right, so the first one, which of the following technologies is most suitable for transferring data between two mobile phones? Now, this is pretty easy. These are the answers. And of course, immediately some of you are going to say, sure, we all use that data Bluetooth, right? I would have thrown something else in the mix and put infrared there, because very early phones used infrared to send information also. So, but Bluetooth is of course the answer, all right? You can also see that the other answers could never truly make sense. There is no way you can get the kind of technology or the kind of equipment to connect two phones via fiber optics. That just doesn't make sense, all right? And microwaves even worse, because microwaves can actually cause damage, damage to you, damage to your phone. All right, next question. Uploading or downloading data to or from a remote computer is done using blogging, instant messaging, internet relay chat, and the last one, file transfer protocol. And your answer would, of course, have to be D, file transfer protocol. Why? Because file transfer protocol is the actual protocol used on the web for the transfer of files. And this just comes, or this answer just comes with the fact that, hey, that's the definition of what a file transfer protocol does. So file transfer protocols allow you to upload files on the web or upload your files to a server, all right? And even download as well. Next question. Each website on the internet can be accessed by entering a unique address. This address is referred to as, and we just did it, so you should be able to guess it. A, HTTP, B, HTML, C, FTP, D, URL. Again, so we just did it. When we said about uploading to YouTube, your URL to YouTube would be www.youtube.com. It couldn't be HTTP, even though HTTP might find itself in the URL. But HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it specifies a kind of protocol that allows your browser to interpret HTML documents. And HTML stands for Hypertext Transfer Markup Language. So anything on the web that is encoded in the HTML, the HTTP protocol allows you to access it or to read it. All right. If it is not in HTML, then that protocol is not going to recognize it. All right. Next question. Which of the following network components is best suited for connecting LANs? And LAN stands for local area networks. And we have different type of networks like MANs, metropolitan area network, and then tiny area network, wide area network. And just to reiterate here, the internet is actually a wide area network, but it's just that it's connected all over the world. So we call it interconnected network. Anyway, so which of the following network components is best suited for the connecting of LANs in a metropolitan area network? Hub, switch, router, modem. And I can just see, I guess, I don't know. All right, so the answer here would be a router. And why? Because a router functions as a gateway to other networks. So that is what a router is. So when you plug in, or when you have a switch connected to a router or something connected to a router, what the router becomes is a connection to the internet. And sometimes that router is also called a gateway. It can't be a switch, because what a switch does is to allow you to facilitate a local area network. All right. So we are done, Lord, and I have so much more to say. Anyway, that's all for today. Until next time, I am Leo Lewis, CSEC IT. Big up.